Today, I wish to share a story that has left a profound mark on my soul. A narrative of shadows, duty, and the enduring weight of history. Freeze! Put your hands up! The command crackled through the air like a sudden thunderclap inside Los Angeles International Airport. Almost instantly, the bustling terminal fell into a deathly silence. Madame Lim, a 7-8-year-old woman, stood frozen in the immigration queue. In that heartbeat, it felt as though time itself had turned to ice. Her fingers tightened around her Singaporean passport. Although her hearing had dimmed with the passing decades, she heard that voice with crystalline clarity. It was directed at her. Every eye in the vicinity turned toward this silver-haired woman. She was petite and composed, dressed in a dark, elegant silk blouse that hinted at her heritage. Her face etched with the fine lines of age, yet she stood as straight and resilient as an old teak tree. The discipline of training from a lifetime ago had seeped into the very marrow of her bones. "I only wish to visit my grandson," she said softly, yet her voice seemed drowned out by the heavy thud of security boots. 2 officers quickly flanked her, their hands hovering near their holsters. The atmosphere was a powder keg ready to ignite. Yet, she did not flinch. Her gaze was steady and devoid of fear, as if she were facing not hostility and suspicion, but a storm she had navigated many times before. This was her first time traveling so far from home, flying over 14 hours from Singapore Changi Airport, crossing multiple time zones and security checkpoints, all for a singular purpose: to see Jason. He was her only flesh and blood, the living proof that she had maintained her conscience even when facing the rigid, cold principles of the intelligence organization in her youth. She had expected this trip to be a simple family reunion, never imagining she would once again be snared in an international tempest. Inside her bag, tucked beside neatly folded clothes, was a box of handmade pineapple tarts, wrapped carefully in a vibrant red cloth. They were made following her sister's traditional recipe from their old home in Katong, the taste Jason had loved most as a child. "This is the flavor of home," she whispered to herself. "He will surely remember." She slowly raised her hands and turned to face the young immigration officer. The man looked barely 30, with a sharp, piercing gaze that brooked no argument. As he flipped through her passport, his brow furrowed. He stopped at a specific page, then quickly reached for his radio. "Code 27, target confirmed, requesting immediate backup." Code 27, that was the designation she had operated under during a clandestine mission in her youth. How could it still be active in the digital archives? Her heart hammered against her ribs, her palms grew damp, but her face remained an impenetrable mask. Decades of discipline within Singapore's elite intelligence circles allowed for no cracks in her composure. "Follow me," a security officer said curtly. She did not ask questions, she simply nodded and followed them with a measured stride. Though she sensed a trap, her spirit was prepared to step once more into the battlefield of an unresolved past. They arrived at a secondary interrogation room, a sterile chamber of cold metal and white light. The wall clock ticked slowly, seemingly counting down to a final judgment. On the table sat her bag. After being seated, her eyes swept over every detail: the cameras, the door locks, the documents, all markers of modern international security protocols. Yet, they also resurrected memories of countless secret interrogations from years prior. In those days, as a specialist in cryptographic analysis, she had never truly left the field of battle. The door swung open again. The young officer entered, followed by a high-ranking official in a crisp uniform. The official placed his hands on the table and pointed to a small notebook retrieved from Madame Lim's bag, a book bound in raw silk with a cover embroidered with Vanda Miss Joaquim orchids. "What is this?" he demanded. It was the mission log she had kept during her service with the Singapore Armed Forces Intelligence Wing decades ago. She had been retired for many years, her identity long since made public in civilian records, and her code name should have been strike-through text in history. This notebook was merely her way of anchoring her memories. "Those are mementos from my time in service," she stated frankly. "Were you involved in military operations?" the man asked, his skepticism clear. She nodded, her gaze unyielding. "I was a cryptanalyst. I assisted in intercepting and decoding enemy communications during border operations in Southeast Asia. Later, I participated in intelligence-sharing missions with certain Western allies." The young officer clearly had not expected a woman in her late 70s to possess such a background. He exchanged a look with his superior and began leafing through the notebook. Indeed, the pages were densely packed with numerical strings and strange phonetic characters. This is not something a typical tourist carries. This is the seed of a political storm, he thought. I only wanted to see my grandson. Why does fate drag me back here? She wondered. But she knew the past rarely let go, especially a past intertwined with secrets that remained buried. Lists hidden beneath the smoke of forgotten skirmishes, treasures interred deep within the strata of history. And she was perhaps the only living soul who knew the true meaning of the ciphers. The room fell silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock, sounding like the beat of a war drum. Madame Lim sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture as perfect as it had been during her military drills. Her steady gaze swept over the two men. They might see a grandmother, but she knew this interrogation was merely the opening gambit. The young officer's expression softened slightly, his rigidity giving way to doubt, though he maintained his professional distance. Madame Lim, please explain the meaning of these codes. Those are records from the era of the Great Silence, she said calmly, as if narrating someone else's life. I remember one night in the northern jungles, decoding a set of signals planted across the region. It allowed us to intercept an ambush that would have cost hundreds of lives. Her voice was steady, but internally she knew those codes represented more than just past glory. They hid evidence of backroom political deals and secret funds that had been laundered across borders, transactions that had never seen the light of day. The young man was visibly unsettled by her revelation. You say this is a mission log, but why does it trigger a high sensitivity alert in the U.S. National Security Database? Madame Lim did not answer directly. Instead, she asked, do you know of the clandestine cooperation between Singapore and certain Western powers in the 1960 seconds? Those operations were never entered into public record. The man frowned, unable to provide an answer. In those years, many things left no paper trail, but they happened nonetheless. Your database sees a code name, but it doesn't understand the story behind it. Do you truly believe a grandmother would fly 14 hours just to provoke Homeland Security? The man fell silent. An older officer who had been observing from the shadows of the corner finally spoke. We have notified our superiors. You are currently on a restricted watch list, and until the verification is complete, your movements are suspended. She did not protest. She simply nodded. Then, may I at least inform my grandson? He is waiting for me, and he will be worried. Her voice carried the weight of both sorrow and the dignity of an elder. It was not a plea, but a polite demand of high standing. The two men looked at each other, and the younger officer finally nodded. We will arrange a supervised call. Please understand our position. She pulled her old notebook closer, flipping to the final page, her sharp eyes scanning the sequence C1457V. She had memorized it for half a century, intending to use it only in the direst of circumstances. She took a deep breath and dialed a number she had kept locked in her mind. Hello, a deep, steady voice answered. This is Orchid, code K, she said. I am asking you to fulfill the promise made all those years ago. There was a heavy silence on the line before the tone changed. Identity confirmation. Border Operation Day. 5. Dawn. Intel from Wind Shadow forwarded. The code is Plan Luminary. She whispered the words, feeling herself transported back to a dark, wind-swept night in 1972. The voice on the other end paused for a few seconds before responding. Understood. Stay where you are. Do not speak to anyone else. Support is on the way. She hung up and closed her eyes, remembering a man she hadn't seen in decades, Robert Henderson, a high-ranking American officer who had fought alongside her in the Southeast Asian theater. They had saved each other's lives more times than she could count. Now, she trusted that if anyone still held the truth, it was Robert. Minutes later, the airport's internal alarms began to blare. An emergency directive from the Department of Homeland Security was issued. Elevate alert status. Initiate internal evaluation and re-verify identity for target on List 27. This was no ordinary passenger alert. It was a high-level national security protocol. The young officer turned pale as he read the screen. Who are you, really? He asked. She looked up, her gaze as sharp as a scalpel. I was once a soldier and later an operative. But today, I am simply a grandmother, keeping a promise to her grandson. This sentence shifted the entire energy of the room. She hadn't come to provoke. She had come to deliver a box of pineapple tarts, a symbol of longing and memory, directly to her family. Just then, the door was thrown open. A tall American man in a tailored suit marched in, clutching diplomatic clearances. He recognized Madame Lim instantly. "Lillian!" he exclaimed, his eyes widening. That familiar voice, that commanding presence, it was indeed Robert Henderson. He rushed forward, placing his documents on the table. "This is Madame Lillian Lim, a key liaison for special operations in the 72nds. She provided critical support during our regional missions. She is now under our direct protection. Rescind all restrictions and facilitate a VIP exit immediately." The young officer could barely breathe. "This is a direct order from the Department of Defense?" "It is," Robert confirmed. "This woman is not just an ally. She is a keeper of truths of a past we are often too afraid to face." Madame Lim's expression softened. She whispered, "I do not fear the truth, nor do I fear history. I only fear those who lack the courage to listen to it." The air in the room was thick with a newfound respect. This was no longer a security check on an elderly woman. It was a confrontation with the voice of history itself. Afterward, she was escorted to a private VIP lounge. Outside the window, planes taxied on the tarmac. Inside, soft jazz played, and the faint aroma of tea filled the air. She sat on a plush leather sofa, a cup of jasmine tea brought from home in her hand. The staff even provided a warm towel. She looked at the box of pineapple tarts wrapped in red cloth, gently stroking the embroidery. It wasn't just food, it was a vessel for memory, the final dignity of a woman who had seen too much. She never imagined this journey to the States would touch the shadows of war again, but she had no regrets. As long as she could see Jason, she would face anything. She watched the night sky, her eyes shining with the same resolve as the young operative who had cracked enemy codes in the jungle all those years ago. The past is never truly forgotten, it merely waits in the silence to be acknowledged. The lights in the VIP lounge dimmed. The paintings on the wall reflected the busy apron of the airport through the glass. The room was a sanctuary, seemingly severed from the chaos of the world outside. Madame Lim sat with her tea, the fragrance taking her back to her old garden in Singapore, where every Lunar New Year, the jasmine bushes would bloom with a haunting sweetness. Those bushes had been planted by her father. She wondered if they were still there. Opposite her sat Robert Henderson, the man whose eyes were as sharp as steel and who had appeared at the most dangerous junctures of her life. 50 years felt like a fleeting dream. Though age had carved a distance between them, what remained was a silent pact. "I've been looking for you for nearly half a century," Robert said softly, his voice a mix of joy and a regret that was hard to vocalize. "I thought we would never cross paths again." Madame Lim's voice was steady, but her eyes were moist. She was not one for easy tears, but the reunion with the past always touched the deepest nerves. "After the Silver Monsoon operation, you vanished completely. Every contact we had went dark. I feared you had been liquidated. I simply chose to return to the life of an ordinary person," she replied quietly. "Too many secrets, too much sacrifice. I did not want to live in those shadows anymore." Robert nodded in understanding, but his tone suddenly turned grave. "Lillian, my appearance today wasn't just about our friendship. We discovered an encrypted scroll recovered from an old colonial-era site in the outskirts of the Malay Peninsula. It records the location of cultural heritage assets lost during the war, but the content is encoded in a mix of archaic dialects and 1972-era Russian military cryptography. "I see where this is going," Madame Lim's eyes sharpened. "Our experts cannot break the structure. The only person I could think of was you. Back then, you were the only one who could crack a command cipher in a single night." She did not answer immediately, staring at a painting of orchids on the wall. Those memories were her most painful. That week in the jungle, intercepting communications while surviving on rain and grit. She had cracked the spiral light code, saving 200 soldiers, but many of her own comrades never made it back. "This isn't just a record of cultural heritage, is it?" she asked firmly. Robert paused, then nodded. "We suspect it also contains records of secret funds held in trust by certain parties during the transition of power. If revealed, it would ignite a geopolitical firestorm." "And you believe this wealth still exists?" "We can't confirm officially, but segments of the code appeared in a 1972 ledger. Furthermore, your code name, Orchid, is marked as the holder of the primary key. You tracked me for this?" Her voice was cold, laced with a flicker of betrayal. "I thought you trusted me, Robert. I didn't think you would use me. I didn't track you to use you. I came to save you," Robert replied, his voice rising slightly. "If I hadn't intervened, the security agencies would have detained you as a potential spy for interrogation." Madame Lim fell silent. She had been a soldier, an information warrior. Secrets and ciphers were once her breath. But she was also a mother, a grandmother. She wanted a peaceful twilight, not a return to the knives of intrigue. I came for my grandson, she said softly. His name is Jason. He works at a tech firm in Silicon Valley. When he was small, he loved my pineapple tarts. He would say, "Grandma, these are the best in the world." She smiled, her eyes shimmering. I came to give him a surprise, to let him know his grandmother still remembers his smile. Robert watched her for a long time before asking, "Will you help us one last time? Not for a country, not for a military, but for history, for the truth." She didn't agree immediately, but she didn't refuse either. Just then, the door to the lounge opened. A young man in a sharp suit, sweat beading on his forehead, ran inside. "Grandma!" Madame Lim stood up instantly, her face radiating light. "Jason!" The two embraced tightly as if the world had stopped and nothing else mattered. "What happened?" "People at the airport said you were taken away. I was terrified." Jason panted, his hands gripping his grandmother's shoulders. "It's nothing, just a misunderstanding," she said soothingly. Grandma hasn't been abroad in a long time, so there were some administrative issues. Robert stepped forward, extending a hand. "You must be Jason. I'm an old friend of your grandmother. She was the most vital member of our regional operations back in the day." Jason was stunned, looking from the American official to his petite grandmother. "Grandma, you were actually a soldier? A code breaker? That's incredible." "It was a long time ago," she said, looking down with a smile. "But some things are etched into your very bones." Jason's eyes sparkled with awe. "So, what happens now?" Madame Lim turned to Robert, her voice commanding. "Give me the data. Let me see if this is the final chapter I left behind." Her voice was not loud, but it possessed an irresistible strength. She wasn't fighting for power. She was fighting for truth and dignity. And now, she was ready to fight once more, this time with her grandson by her side. Madame Lim sat composed in a high-security briefing room. On the white screen, images of the yellowed, ancient scroll were projected. It was a clandestine document retrieved from a forgotten bunker in Southeast Asia, possessing a structure of staggering complexity. Archaic Malay dialects were woven with phonetic English, integrated into a cryptographic format, used by Soviet-era intelligence. It was as if someone had designed it specifically so that future generations would never unravel it. It was a confrontation between history and memory. Robert handed a data tablet to Madame Lim. She accepted it with both hands, without a trace of hesitation. Her fingers were still nimble, and though age had made her body fragile, her mind was as sharp and clear as it had been in the command centers of her youth. She did not rush into the decryption. Instead, she opened her silk notebook, gently turning to the handwritten ciphers near the end. It was the master key system she had devised during her intelligence years. In those days, every scrap of information was bought with blood. She had guarded these documents like a sacred trust, never discarding them even after decades of retirement, because she knew that one day they might be needed to save the truth once more. "The logic of this cipher is unusual," she said softly while examining the images. "It uses 5 character groups, where 2 characters are derived from ancient scripts, 1 is phonetic, and the last 2 are numeric. It's a hybrid alphanumeric code." Jason stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the screen. His laptop was running an advanced cryptographic analysis algorithm he had developed himself. The program converted the images into various variable groups. "Grandma, if we input the rules from your notebook into the model, we can build a reverse matching index." He said this while typing commands, then turned to her. "That way, your memory becomes the foundational layer of the algorithm." Madame Lim offered a proud smile and nodded slowly. Since childhood, this boy had shown an extraordinary gift for mathematics and logic. It seemed all her efforts and her long silence had finally found an heir in this moment. "I remember when you were little, sitting on my lap listening to stories, saying you wanted to be a detective," she said with tenderness. "Now, you are the one building the algorithms." Jason chuckled softly. "It's still a form of code breaking, isn't it, Grandma?" A shared sense of purpose flowed between grandmother and grandson, bridging the gap across generations. At that moment, the door to the room opened slightly. A middle-aged man in a suit, with graying hair and a gentle expression, walked in. His sudden appearance sent a jolt of anxiety through Madame Lim. She could hardly believe her eyes. The man bowed slightly to her. "Madame Lim, we meet again." She was stunned. This man was Mr. Tan, the son of a high-ranking officer she had saved during a border skirmish decades ago. That night, amidst the sound of gunfire, she had found his father hiding in the brush, his leg badly wounded. She had not reported him. Instead, she had used her own medical kit to stabilize him and helped him vanish into the night. "Do you remember? My father asked you why you didn't turn him in. You said that wars end, but the value of a human life is eternal." He said this, his eyes reddening. Madame Lim remained silent for a long moment before nodding. "I remember. It was the most righteous thing I ever did." "Madam, this scroll is not just a code or a list of assets. It is historical evidence. It contains the names of families who were wronged and the location of national heritage. These items represent our dignity. I hope to fight alongside you this time." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting a complex array of emotions. The years were cruel yet generous, turning old enemies into allies and transforming the fear of the past into responsibility and will. Robert pulled a new stack of documents from his bag. "Washington has arranged for us to travel to a secure facility to finalize the decryption and comparison. We depart tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Jason, you're coming too." Jason was startled. "Me, sir?" "Yes," Robert nodded. "This time we need your grandmother's memory and your expertise. It is a dual-layered decryption operation. Neither can do it alone." Madame Lim did not speak. She simply tightened her grip on her teacup. Fate was pushing her once more to a crossroads. She was used to acting alone, but now, the young life before her was the one thing she never wanted to involve in this shadow world. "Grandma, I'm willing to go." Jason's voice was firm. "Not for the adventure, but because of you. You taught me that knowledge isn't for escaping history, but for facing it." Her heart trembled slightly. Yes, this was not just a mission. It was a legacy of struggle. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Then we begin tomorrow." That night, she sat alone on the hotel balcony, watching the lights of Los Angeles. She recalled the nights she spent hiding in the jungle borders years ago. Then, she was young and fearless. Now, she was old, yet her resolve was undimmed. History would not reveal itself. Someone had to stand up to decode it, record it, and bring the truth to light. And this time, she would finish this test from the past alongside her grandson. At 5:30 a.m., the California air was shrouded in a thin, crisp mist. The sun had not yet fully risen, but the military runway was already brilliantly lit. The private jet prepared for them sat idling on the tarmac. Its exterior was indistinguishable from a business jet, but inside, it was outfitted with the most advanced information, decryption, equipment, and signal jammers. This was no ordinary flight. It was a mission of intelligence that could shift the geopolitical landscape. Madame Lim wore a light gray cotton jacket and a black baseball cap. Her frame was slender but as upright as a pine tree. As she stepped into the cabin, she spoke little, merely nodding to Jason. She took a window seat and placed her silk notebook in her lap, as if it were a weapon she refused to put down. Jason sat beside her, setting up his laptop and cloud computing modules, observing his grandmother's expression. He realized that even under extreme pressure, her gaze remained as steady as calm water, as if she had reached a silent pact with fate. There was no need to run, and nothing to fear. "Grandma, are you afraid?" Jason finally asked. She paused, then replied softly, "I am not afraid. I only fear making the wrong choice." The engines began to roar. As the plane climbed into the sky, she closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw the unfinished business of decades ago, Operation Silent Shadow, a secret cooperation between Singapore and Western intelligence. At the time, as a cryptographer, she had been responsible for encoding highly sensitive documents. It was rumored that those ciphers held the location of treasures moved by the royal families of the region during the transition to independence assets that had been held by Western powers but never returned. She never knew where those documents ultimately went. After the mission ended, all records were purged, and the team scattered. She had chosen the path of silence, returning to a normal life. Yet, she never forgot that those codes were never fully resolved. In her notebook lay the remnants of those shadows. The plane reached cruising altitude. The projection equipment in the cabin began to operate, displaying new decryption data retrieved from the secret bunker. Compared to the first batch, this was more fragmented, but held more clues. Fragments of text appeared on the screen, interspersed with symbolic terms like bloodline and prophecy. Clearly, this was not just an inventory of goods, it held symbolic political weight. "This is not a record of ordinary property," Madame Lim's voice was low. "It is a fusion of cultural memory and symbols of sovereignty." Robert nodded. "Based on historical analysis, we believe it records the transfer of ancient regalia and seals of the sultanates. They were trying to preserve the last hope of a kingdom, hoping to one day restore their power. But history did not give them that chance. He spoke calmly, without cynicism. But these items still exist. Do you know what that means? She turned to Jason and Robert. It is not just a collection of artifacts. It is a night in history that hasn't ended. Jason bit his lip. So, if it falls into the hands of those with ill intent, it could be used to spark ethnic conflict or revivalist movements, even trigger international asset disputes? Robert continued. That is why we cannot leave the decryption to politicians or conglomerates. We must let history speak for itself through the truth. Madame Lim added, and we are the ones redefining it all. Just then, the radar indicated they were approaching their landing point, a secluded base on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. This site was a data processing hub built during the Cold War. Although partially decommissioned, it still housed high-level encryption systems. After landing, a convoy of vehicles hurried them to an underground facility. Behind thick steel doors lay rows of massive servers. Jason immediately went to work, inputting his grandmother's handwritten notes into the digital model. He categorized the data into 4 groups: causal structures, context, historical relations, and calibrated them against the ancient scrolls. Madame Lim stood by, her hands folded. Though she no longer operated the hardware, every time the system issued an error signal, she precisely identified the core issue. The section, "Stone is wind," the horizon is the limit, you are misinterpreting the phrasing. It's a coordinate for boundary in the old code. East longitude 107, while horizon refers to south latitude 22. You must switch to coordinate mode. Jason understood instantly and corrected the model. Oh, I see. It's not a metaphor. It's a coordinate. As the model stabilized, a map outline appeared on the screen, marking a jungle area in the borders of Southeast Asia. Beside it were characters in an archaic script, the land of the inner wall. Those who enter have no hope. Everyone was stunned. This was more than a code. It was a warning. And a test, Robert said quietly. Madame Lim stared at the screen, her eyes flashing like steel. Only those who truly understand the history and the price paid will dare to step into that land. She turned to Jason. Are you still willing to go with me? Jason did not hesitate. Grandma, I learned from you that knowledge isn't for escaping history, but for facing it. She offered a thin smile. It was the smile only a veteran understands, not of pride, but of a sense of mission awakened in the blood. That night, a private jet took off from the Washington base, crossing the Pacific to land at a secret airstrip in the Southeast Asian border region. This was once a flashpoint of Cold War conflict, now abandoned to the wild. Denser jungle, treacherous terrain, and unstable communications. This land held many silent stories, and it was the final destination for Madame Lim. She stepped out of the cabin, her feet touching the earth, and she immediately smelled the damp, heavy scent of the soil, familiar and real. It was the scent she had left behind during her final mission over 30 years ago, a scent mixed with danger, betrayal, and uncertainty. Jason followed her, carrying a portable signal converter and his laptop. Though young, there was no trace of playfulness on his face. He knew this was no simulation, but a real-world operation that could rewrite history. They joined a coordination team consisting of former intelligence officers and local guides who knew the terrain, led by an old colleague, Mr. Tan. He had been responsible for communications in this sector years ago. Now silver-haired, his eyes were still sharp. Lillian, I never thought we would meet here again in this lifetime. Tan sighed. Our generation must be the ones to listen to the names that were lost and finally bring this to a close, she replied softly. The operation began before dawn. They traversed steep mountain paths, following old military trails. Midway, they passed a bunker, overgrown with vines. Madame Lim stopped for a long time. This was once a signal relay point. That night, I decoded the Bluebird directive here. Our team leader never returned. She spoke quietly, her calm tone silencing the group. History was not just in books, it was hidden in every ruin, every fragment of code, and every unfinished word of a veteran. After 7 hours of trekking, they arrived at the land of the inner wall. Before them was a mountain cliff that looked ordinary, but Jason, using his grandmother's notes and the geographic model, identified 3 suspicious points. Beneath a specific rock was a nearly invisible crevice. He knelt, using an infrared scanner. The device indicated a hollow structure and metallic signatures inside. There's a door here, he said. Mr. Tan signaled, and the team carefully moved the stones with specialized equipment. Soon, a moss-covered, rusted door appeared. Madame Lim looked at the carvings above the entrance. Hidden in the heart, The wise enter. The master is king. It is a warning, she said. Not everyone can bear the weight of these memories. The door creaked open. A thin mist drifted out, sounding like the whispers of the past. They switched on their flashlights and entered. Inside was a damp, narrow tunnel. On the walls were carved ancient symbols and colonial-era scripts. At the end of the tunnel was a stone chamber. Inside were 3 sealed wooden chests, draped in red cloth. Madame Lim took a deep breath and opened the first chest. Inside were neatly arranged jade seals, ancient scrolls of the sultanates, and a gold plaque. "This is the heritage of our region," she whispered. Jason looked at his grandmother, suddenly understanding what she had been protecting. It wasn't just a secret. It was the cultural memory and the national responsibility of a people. The second box was opened, containing gold and silver bars, though far fewer than rumors suggested. The third box left everyone speechless. It was a stack of yellowed notebooks, the covers written in 3 languages, copy of the 3-party secret treaty, Operation Silent Shadow. This is not just a historical document. It is a black archive of international politics. It is evidence of secret transactions between intelligence agencies in this region during the war. "This will cause a storm," Robert said, his face grim. "But people should know where the storm came from," Madame Lim insisted. She slowly stood up, smoothed her clothes, and looked at Jason. "Do you understand? My generation lived between truth and lies. Your generation must decide whether to inherit this complexity or not." Jason didn't speak. He simply nodded. Suddenly, the communication headsets crackled with interference. A team member rushed in. "Trouble. Our signals are being jammed from outside. There are unidentified groups moving toward this coordinate." Everyone went on high alert. "Mr. Tan ordered, leave the heavy gear. Take the documents and evacuate immediately." Madame Lim stared at the artifacts, her eyes filled with resolve. "We cannot let them be buried a second time." Jason digitized the final data. Madame Lim took charge of the original documents. Carrying a piece of history that spanned 3 generations, they stepped out of the stone chamber. Dawn was breaking. The mountain mist was clearing. The first light of day shone on her wrinkled face, sharp and clear like a blade. She knew this was not the end, but a beginning. In the jungle, the air was heavy as lead. The static in the headsets was incessant, slithering like a viper through their nerves. Mr. Tan led the team, quickly retreating along the extraction route toward the mountain pass. 3 kilometers ahead was a temporary helicopter landing zone. If they missed the window, the entire team would be forced to spend the night in the wilderness without communication, facing high risks. Madame Lim walked in the middle of the group. The secret chamber behind them had been resealed by the security team, ensuring no trace remained. But in her heart, she knew what truly could not be sealed was this memory, a piece of history buried for decades, now finally revealed under the light of truth. She knew there was no turning back. "Grandma, we need to pick up the pace," Jason said, one hand holding his laptop, the other supporting her arm. Although she could still walk, his concern was evident. For the first time, he truly understood that memory was not just a symbol, but a physical weight. "I can walk," she said firmly. But Jason could feel her steps growing heavier. He didn't push her, instead walking silently beside her. After clearing the mountain path, they saw signal smoke rising from the distant forest. It was a warning. Unauthorized drones had appeared in the airspace. "Why are there other drones?" Jason asked, tense. Robert frowned. "Our coordinates have been compromised. This isn't just local forces. There may be other intelligence organizations intervening." He turned to Madame Lim. "They are coming for you." She nodded, saying calmly, "I know." At that moment, the team split into 2 paths. One responsible for transferring the electronic data, and the other escorting Madame Lim and the physical archives. Just as they accelerated, gunfire erupted from the rear of the forest. "The forward team has deployed jammers to block the pursuers." "We have to change the extraction route," Mr. Tan shouted. Minutes later, they gathered at an abandoned telegraph station near the base of the mountain. This site had once been a secret post for bilateral intelligence exchange during the Cold War, never recorded on any map. Now, it was their only temporary safe harbor. A dusty old telegraph radio was still intact. Madame Lim approached it, wiping the dust from its surface. She remembered the frequencies and the codes. She was the one who had set them up decades ago. "I will send a final signal," she said. Robert was startled. "You still remember the frequency?" She offered a thin smile. "Some things are etched into the bone." She skillfully entered the commands. Amidst the electrical hiss, She whispered into the microphone. "This is Orchid, code K. The inner wall is found. The asset is secured. Confirm identity and extraction route." A moment later, a crackling voice came through the receiver. "This is North Star. Received. Plan B is activated. Hold your position." The signal cut out. Madame Lim closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew this was not just about saving artifacts. It was a calculation that crossed borders and time, and she was at the center of the vortex. Jason copied the final batch of data to a secure drive and handed it to Robert. "If we fail, this must be delivered to the historical archives in Washington for safekeeping." "No," Robert shook his head. "It should be given to your grandmother." Madame Lim raised an eyebrow. "These documents are your life, your belief, and the only witness to this memory." She did not refuse. She tucked the hard drive into the inner pocket of her jacket, the very place she had hidden secret codes in her youth. Now, she was protecting the truth in the same way. Just then, the sound of tires screeching echoed from outside. A black off-road vehicle roared into the courtyard. 3 armed men jumped out. One held a signal jammer, pointing it directly at the station. Robert drew his weapon, but Madame Lim stopped him. "Let me." She stepped out the door, her hands empty, but her gaze as sharp as a blade. The lead man had a sneer on his face. "So you're the famous Orchid? You're 1 foot in the grave and you still think you can keep secrets?" "You are mistaken," she said firmly. "What is truly terrifying is not that a secret is known, but knowing it and doing nothing." He laughed. "Hand over the data, and I'll let you live." "You don't understand the value of that data at all," she said, stepping forward. "What you want is money, political leverage. But these documents represent the memory of a people. They are the dignity of history." Before she could finish, the sound of helicopter rotors thundered from the ridge. A military identification light flashed. The pursuers panicked and began to retreat. Madame Lim looked back. "That's the RSAF!" Tan shouted with joy. "Backup is here!" The helicopter landed, and Special Forces personnel rushed down to escort everyone aboard. Madame Lim was the last to board. Before entering, she looked back at the familiar yet alien forest and whispered, "I didn't come for revenge. I came to say goodbye." The helicopter took off, piercing through the mountain mist in the morning light, leaving behind silence and shock. Madame Lim sat in her seat, clutching the hard drive, her gaze fixed on the distance. She knew she hadn't lost, nor had she won. She had simply fulfilled her duty. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of an office in Singapore, casting a soft golden glow. Madame Lim sat at one end of a long table. Opposite her sat representatives from the Ministry of Culture, the National Archives, and the Military History Committee. The room was silent, the air thick with unspoken weight. This was a private meeting. No reporters, no cameras. She was the only protagonist. On the table lay 3 items: a handwritten code notebook, an encrypted hard drive, and a handwritten letter. These 3 things were enough to rewrite half a century of post-war history in Southeast Asia. "Madame Lim," the director said softly, "the data you provided has been cross-verified by both Singaporean and American authorities. It is confirmed. There are indeed records of cultural assets that were never disclosed and instances of intelligence cooperation that were unbalanced during the Cold War." Madame Lim did not reply. She sat as still as a statue. Throughout this entire journey, she had never made excuses for her past, knowing that some things are not proven with words, but built from a lifetime of choices. Due to the sensitive nature, the administration recommends that the related content not be made public. Another official paused, then added, "However, a special committee will be formed in the name of Historical Heritage Protection. Your name will be recorded as a long-term secret contributor." "I did not come for a name," she finally spoke, her voice slightly raspy but firm. "I came only to return the truth to those who can see its value." After the meeting, a young staff member escorted her to a new museum, not yet open to the public. It was the National Museum of History and Secret Archives. On the walls hung black and white photos, some of battlefield communications officers, some of underground operatives. She saw a photo of herself in her youth, placed in the deepest part of the 3rd exhibition hall, with a small caption, "The Code Keeper, Lillian Lim." She stood before the photo for a long time, as if seeing her past self, alone in a forward post, flipping through dense telegrams, recording numbers that saved lives under a dim light. "Does this not feel like a tombstone to you?" she suddenly asked the guide. The guide was stunned, not knowing how to respond. "It is not a criticism," she smiled. "It's just that, I realize at a certain age, one no longer needs applause or praise. One only wants to know if the things they participated in truly had meaning. As she left the museum, Jason was waiting by the door. He wore a dark jacket and held a thermos of freshly brewed jasmine tea, his grandmother's favorite. "Grandma, I just received a letter from the U.S. Congress. They want to invite you as a witness for a closed-door hearing, to share your perspective on intelligence cooperation during the Cold War." "I will not go," she said flatly. Jason was surprised. "Why?" "It's a chance to reclaim your legacy." "They don't want me to reclaim anything. They want to find fault and use history as a weapon," she replied softly. "Some wars are not won with weapons, but with explanations." Jason fell silent. He understood his grandmother's decision and respected it. For her, this was no longer about justification. It was about ending the long journey of struggle against memory. A few days later, she and Jason returned to their family home. In the back garden, she personally placed the original notebook and a jade seal brought back from the secret chamber into a niche in the wall, covering it with a stone slab. "This is our family memory," she said. "It must not be lost, but it doesn't need to be on display forever." That night, she and Jason sat by the patio, drinking tea. She asked, "How will you remember me?" Jason replied, "I won't just remember you as a soldier or a codebreaker. I'll remember the grandma who made pineapple tarts for me, the one who told me that what is harder than being strong is being clean of heart." She nodded, her eyes shining. "That is enough." A few months later, Madame Lim resigned from all her advisory roles and moved back to a quiet life in Singapore. Jason was eventually hired as a research consultant at a university data center, focusing on digital memory preservation and historical decryption projects using AI. He wrote their experience into a book titled The Quiet Sentinel. The book did not explicitly name her, but every page hid her shadow. On the day of its publication, a reader commented, "In history, those truly worthy of respect are not those who create power, but those who quietly guard the truth." Madame Lim, in her twilight years, often said, "Throughout my life, I have seen too many documents, languages, and people vanish. But what I fear most is not destroyed data, but a truth that no one wishes to hear." She had been a spy, a mother, and a hero. She chose silence, then stood up when it was time to speak. This was not a story of winning or losing, but of resolve crossing nations, languages, and time. Those who choose not to forget are the true recorders of history. History does not only exist in textbooks or monuments. It is hidden in every person who chooses to be quiet, yet remains steadfast. Madame Lim's life teaches us that truth is not for winning, but for ensuring that forgetting does not become a habit. Our generation may not experience the fires of war, but we face another kind of battle. Indifference toward memory, the simplification of the complex, and the falsification of the past. If no one stands to speak, all that remains is the version that has been chosen for us. From her, we see more than intelligence and codes. We see perseverance, dignity, and a soft power. Though years bent her body, her gaze remained firm. She chose to speak when the time came and pass the torch when the mission was done. This is a protection passed down through generations, not for the halo of a hero, but for the names and memories yet unrecorded. If this story has touched a part of your heart, please take a moment in the comments below to share your thoughts on memory, history, and choice. We want to hear your voice, for every response is part of the effort to keep the truth flowing. Like, comment, and share this story so more people may see how an unsung veteran used her life to guard the truth against being forged. This is not the end, but the beginning of another form of legacy. Are you ready?